Hello and welcome to the People Who Read People podcast with me, Zach Elwood. This is a podcast about psychology and behavior. You can learn more about it at peoplewhoreadpeople.com. Sometimes this podcast focuses on America's political polarization problem because I think it's our most serious problem and also a problem that, by its nature, prevents people from caring much about solving the problem. I focus on it because I think not nearly enough people do. On today's episode, I talked to David Foster, who writes about polarization and the media landscape on his site, knowthesystem.org, and who recently released a book aimed at reducing toxic polarization titled Moderates of the World Unite, Reworking the Political Media Complex. David and I talk about polarization and the media, and we focus on the question, what's the most optimal strategy for trying to reduce toxic polarization? Is it better to focus on making systemic changes like passing legislation aimed at improving the media environment or other policies? Or is it better to focus on changing the culture, changing the way everyday people think and treat each other? David is focused more on the systemic aspects, specifically with regards to the media environment. In my own work, I've focused on more cultural change types of things. So this talk might be interesting to you apart from political polarization, because the focus really is on how do we change culture for the better? What are the levers we have to pull, and which levers are the most effective? And for anyone interested in polarization, I think this is a very important question that doesn't get asked enough. Trying to figure out the best ways to spend our time is an important issue. We want to get the most bang for our buck or for our effort. So it's David and I's hope that this is of value for people in the bridge building and depolarization space. And just to note that this is a video talk and the video version is on my People Who Read People YouTube channel. So if you're listening on audio and it sounds less edited than usual, that's why I've been trying to do more video talks. Okay, here's the talk with David Foster, author of Moderates of the World Unite. Yeah, let's start out with how did you get into this work? What drives your passion in this area? If you want to summarize that, I know that's a big question.
Yeah, well, yeah, that is a big question. But I mean, the motivation is probably pretty similar to yours, and everyone who works in the whole problem of polarization and depolarization. I want to see this country have a more, pragmatic, problem-solving attitude towards everything, and we have a polarization is kind of making our government, especially the Congress, kind of dysfunctional and unable to do much of anything, as we are currently seeing in the Congress, even in the past few weeks. And so that's what's driving me. It's I guess you could call it idealistic, but I'm really interested in I think it's a super important problem, and it kind of gets in the way of solving other problems.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's what's driving me. And I've had, as you know, my career has been in online course development, e-learning, and I and my educational background even goes back into that, studying learning theory and cognitive science and computer science, and so that's I've always I know a lot about learning systems, like technology-based learning systems, and I think maybe that gave me ideas about ways to approach the problem that not everyone would think of, um,
Mhm.
I rose to a pretty high level, I guess you could say, in that whole sector, and but decided 5 years ago that I want to work on this problem
Mhm.
because it's so urgent.
Mhm. Mhm. Is part of your frustration maybe like mine, where you feel like a bit of frustration because people aren't paying enough attention to these things as they should?
Yeah, yeah, huge frustration, and it's super daunting. I mean, I you and I have talked a lot, and I think we both feel it. It's um, I remember a guy who was kind of a mentor who was coaching me, and he described it once. Well, David, what you're doing is sort of like standing on the yellow line in between two, lanes of traffic speeding in different directions. That's kind of where the moderates and the people who want to work on polarization are.
You need like a thin yellow line flag or something.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely, definitely.
maybe we could work on that branding. Yeah, that might be good.
No, there's a branding opportunity for sure.
Um, yeah, maybe that's a good segue to talk about. You and I have talked about the two different high level categories of how to approach this kind of work. Like you focused on the more systemic changes, like changes to media or policy, and I have focused more on like grassroots, like convincing people of the need for it. And yeah, and I want us to be real frank here because I have my own doubts about whether I'm spending, we can all like second guess if we're spending our time on the right things. But maybe you could talk a little bit about, why you have focused on the systemic changes as opposed to, the more kind of grassroots, mass, mass mainstream convincing efforts.
Right, right. Yeah, that's it's a really good question, and quite a dilemma. And I have to caveat first by saying that I do see a lot of value in grassroots efforts, and there's I admire the work that people are doing, and it can only be a net positive. It's even if it doesn't change the world, every little bit helps. And I also, the other caveat is, we need multiple approaches. None of us knows which is going to have the most impact, and so we should welcome all approaches, as I do, and I'm sure you do as well.
Mm.
Um, the the analogy, or try out this analogy. I'm curious what you think. Um, I my belief is that there's some value towards focusing on the system level things in terms of efficiency and productivity and impact. An analogy that I would use is when inflation is heating up. One approach would be to try to convince all the companies in the country to not raise prices, you know. Or the Fed can raise interest rates, and it spreads through the whole system, and it's more efficient and scalable and all those good things. And so the analogy, in the face of escalating polarization, one approach is to try to convince individuals to, work on their own contributions to polarization. And you'll get some people to do it for sure, and it helps. But my take on it is that why not instead go at the cause of it in the media environments,
Hmm.
and what's really causing it? Because it's my belief that the escalating polarization we've had in the last 20 years is not due to a change in human nature. That's kind of the reverse direction of the pole of causality, in my opinion. That when you're trying to fix individuals, that's trying to fix the effects, whereas in my opinion, the cause is primarily due to the change in the public media environment.
Right, the environment. Yeah. Hmm.
Or not public media, just the media environment.
Right, right. Yeah, and I'd say I'm with you in the sense that I don't have any firm opinions. Actually, talking to you about this in the past made me update my book because I felt like I was, downplaying systemic change too much. It's not that I'm like, I think systemic changes are very good and very important. It's more, and like you say, I think we need everybody working on it because I think the way I think of what I'm doing or what like other organizations who focus on, convincing people of the need, I see it as like some of those people we convince that it's a big problem will help create the systemic changes, right? And there needs to be some sort of pressure to work on those things. But yeah, like you say, it's like I have doubts about what am I or what are any of these organizations really doing? They're because if you change a few people's minds, yeah, how much is it doing? But then you can also have those doubts about the systemic change aspect where it's like, how can we really get this gridlocked, Congress to like pass a systemic change? And so like to your point, it's like I see them as like working in concert. You have to like convince enough people to even try it to, whatever you're gonna try to do systemically. Yeah.
Right, right, right. Yeah, it's a chicken and egg problem for sure. Yeah, I think one of the things that the grassroots efforts aren't doing enough of. I agree that that could, if enough people are sort of um, working on depolarizing themselves and learning how to be more civil and so forth, that could generate some pressure, but it's not really getting them thinking about the media environment and about, what's and so if no one's really thinking about, well, what could Congress even do? That's not going to put any pressure on Congress. Or at least that's my concern.
Yeah, and to your point, I could imagine, like somebody could easily take a Republican or a Democrat congressperson could easily take an idea out of your book and make a bill around it or something, right? And like theoretically, that could get pretty easily get bipartisan support and could pass, and you could make a big impact. So I mean, I see your argument that it's like the effort of getting something through to draw attention or to change the media environment is like theoretically like a much bigger payoff for the effort, right? Because I have that sense too when I'm like, say like, say even a few thousand people read my book, for example, it's like, yeah, what does that really do? It's like I think most of that effort is actually wasted, but it's like kind of my hope that a few of those people will do something else, do work on
Yeah,
like a few of those people will be influential is kind of like my idea. And, that's how I think of it. It's like maybe one of those people, for example, could be a congressperson who takes one of your ideas and makes it into a bill. So like
absolutely.
that's kind of how
Absolutely.
I view the interconnection there. It's like I think they're it's all good stuff, and yeah, and I'm not convinced my approach is like the most efficient or that so a quick note here. I wanted to say that I think I was underselling cultural change work a little bit here. I don't work on cultural change stuff only in the hopes that it gets people to work on more systemic changes. That's underselling what I see as the power and goals there. I think it's actually easier to change culture than we sometimes think. Sometimes all it can take is a few relatively influential people pushing back on certain behaviors to affect other people's behaviors, to affect a lot of people's behaviors. I think many of us have overly pessimistic and fatalistic views about the difficulty of changing culture. I think getting a decent percentage of people to think differently about politics and how we engage with other people can actually make a big difference, especially if some of those people have influential voices and are brave enough to speak up and push back on the incentives and the toxic polarization. I just wanted to clarify that a little bit as I felt I was doing a disservice to the cultural change work. Okay, back to the talk.
Well, I'm probably jumping ahead and, talking about the specific ideas, but you said something about it would be easy enough for a legislator to take one of the ideas in my book and turn it into a bill. necessarily think that's the case. I don't think it'd be that easy.
Oh, not that easy. It's
Yeah,
possible though, right? I mean,
but it's possible. Yeah,
yeah.
and you know, unless people are sort of suggesting it, then it won't happen at all. But and you know, we can get into this if you want, but you know, uh, part of the problem is especially on the right, who just doesn't want a lot of people on the right who just don't want the government to do anything. You know, you can make your arguments about how, wait, this is fair to both sides, you know, what we're doing here. But yeah, there will be resistance
Yeah,
in
to that
doing that kind
point.
of thing.
Yeah, to that point, that was actually like it's kind of obvious in hindsight, but that didn't really strike me until pretty recently, a few months ago, where I saw a conservative person on Twitter respond to an idea of a government-led, depolarization effort. They were, like you said, they were very much against the idea for the usual conservative reasons of like, we don't want government solving this. Government's just going to make it worse, or
Right,
so that I hadn't really realized that, but in hindsight, it's like, yeah, of course they'd be against a government solution. That's not to say all conservatives, all Republicans would be
right.
against that, because clearly Republicans have some government programs they like. So if you could convince enough of them, then maybe it'd go over well. But yeah, that was an interesting angle too that I hadn't really seen until recently.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's one of many
Obstacles.
obstacles and barriers. Yeah,
Yeah.
or headwinds, or I don't know what the right metaphor is.
Yeah, I think the difficult thing, with the gridlock and the always thinking in the worst case framing is like, even if you arrived at something that in better times both sides would agree to, mostly it's like you can how it often goes is like one side will be like, I think they're getting a slight advantage, so they are against it, so that kind of how a lot of these things end up going, which is speaks to just the problem of polarization in general. Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, this is another one of these things where a large portion, I think, a large portion of the country is pretty tired and disgusted with, you know, the extreme partisanship and the gridlock. And, you know, I mean, even you could even maybe say that a lot of Trump's base is motivated by just, you know, the antipathy towards Congress, and, you know, how they just aren't, you know, paying attention to what uh, you know, what they care about, or what
Hmm.
what their needs are, or and so, you know, and then there's the, you know, the exhausted majority kind of
Right.
stuff, you know. So I think there's a hunger for it,
Hmm.
um, but it needs to get more focused, and that's, I think, one of the things I hope my book might be, you know, in a small way helpful in trying to do.
I do think there's, even in Congress, I think there's, even if they don't, there's like pressure to not talk about it. I think even many of those people want solutions, right? Because they don't, I think many of them, even if they stay quiet for fear out of hurting their side or whatever, I think many of them are sick of it, and
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Well, you know, like there's the problem solvers caucus, which is,
right,
you know, that's kind of their mission, is to sort of bust through all that. But
yeah, hmm,
it's not, it hasn't been easy. And
uh,
and no labels, you know, this um, you know, it's been excoriated by Democrats because it's a spoiler. It's going to get Trump into office, you know, and so forth. But I, you know, in spite of all that, I think they have, you know, they have some base of support that's, you know, wants to look for a different way.
hmm, hmm. It's good to have. Yeah, it's like a trial balloon to see how much support those kind of, yeah, third party candidates
Right.
would get. Yeah.
Totally.
Do you want to talk about let's talk about your book. If you want to talk about, what were you most proud of when it comes to the proposals in there, or what was the most unique ideas? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, definitely. That's what we're here for, isn't it?
If you're willing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you know, haven't even said much about the book, so just
Mm,
kind of high level to start. The book has kind of has two parts to it. One is it's kind of an analysis of the way that for-profit media in the last 2 to 3 decades has influenced and caused really rapidly accelerating polarization in the country. And then the second half is I attempt to provide a vision of several national level initiatives that at a scale that it tries to match the size of the problem as a way to potentially turn things around. And um, I can talk a little bit about some of the ideas, but the key theme I guess would be that it's trying to change the national speech environment, and I think it's going to require not for every one of the proposals, but for a lot of them, some legislative action to make them happen. Um, and that will bring out the free speech or First Amendment absolutists saying, you can't do that. But a key is that it's not, none of the proposals are about any type of censorship or trying to control the content, and all of the proposals have to be nonpartisan and have the right governance structures in them, and so on. Um, and the goal is not to change the content of speech anywhere, but the speech environment. The world has changed pretty dramatically in the last 2 decades. The speech environment, it's nothing like anything the founders could have ever envisioned. And so, and what we've seen is, social media is destroying the economic model uh, for journalism, and it's just become this terrible race to for profitability. Both the social media companies and the news media companies. It's have you heard the expression cheap speech, which is was coined a few years ago? It's
I don't think so.
it just kind of an acknowledgement that in the old days there wasn't very many ways to get speech out there. There was a few networks and so on, and in the new environments, with lots of different TV channels, and of course with social media, and blogs, we're just drowned in speech, and the founders could have never anticipated that, um, I believe that um, there's kind of a the fourth estate is supposed to facilitate democratic discourse, and I think what we're looking at is a massive market failure, and that's why I think who else but the government can come in and try to fix the speech
Mm,
environment, not speech.
right, the environment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So
yeah, go ahead.
let me stop there.
Oh, yeah.
I
Well,
can.
I had a, this is something I think about sometimes. I'm curious if you've thought a bit about it. I sometimes think about the immense demand for content that all these companies have and how that's a factor in destabilizing us. Like, it's like in order to fill these airwaves, these many, this vacuum of airwaves, people need content. And like, what are we going to make for content? We're going to make stuff that presses people's emotional buttons, right? So it's like in order for the demand to create all this, to make money basically and fill these, this huge amount of bandwidth we have of content is like, and then they create all this stuff that polarizes us and divides us unintentionally often, but I just see it as kind of like this machine for destabilizing us. It's like, yeah, there's just so many narratives floating around, so many divisive polarizing narratives, and just
Yeah.
so much content. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Um, yeah. Well, I I think, in this new era, um, we should start regarding the really limited amount of attention that individuals have um, as kind of a precious societal resource
Mm.
that we should stop wasting on sensationalism and polarizing rhetoric and stuff like that. It's a really precious resource that we should be trying harder to um, uh, make the best use of for everyone.
Right. Just think about the millions of hours that people spend on these, meaningless shows and watching videos on TikTok. Anyway, I'm digressing and ranting a little bit, but it's just, I mean, I do that a good amount myself, but,
Yeah,
um,
well,
maybe we can talk about your, yeah, one of your ideas that you're most proud of. I think you had mentioned something about the, can't remember the exact name, but something involving silo.
yeah, yeah. No, that's one I like to. That might be the one I'm proud of
Mm.
at some level at least. I think it's kind of creative. Um, so yeah, that one is it's in the modern media environment we have these echo chambers as they're called. Maybe it's sometimes overstated, but and when you're in an echo chamber, you only hear the version of reality, on that political side. And what you do hear about the other side is mostly straw men. It's like,
Worst case arguments. Yeah.
yeah, worst case arguments. And when you're in echo chambers, it also can tend to push everyone to have more extreme views. Anyway, so the idea for this proposal is to uh, pass a new law that requires the all media outlets of all types, and this is not never been easy for me to explain real quickly, but I'll do my best. Requires all of them to allow a new technical scheme that um, injects counter speech into right on the spot counter speech into every and well any and every broadcast or article or whatever. And the way that would be done is to uh, register what I call a designated opposition person for each of those news outlets, or I don't know how granular it would get, but um, and there'd be on all screens, whether it's a TV screen, computer screen, um, for social media or for news websites, at the end of each or associated with each content piece, there would be this recognizable button, which I call OPPO, OPPO for opposition. No one is ever encouraged or required to click on it, but anytime they do, um, they can get what an opposition person would have to say about that particular content. And so can you see how it kind of busts open the echo chamber in a way, by inserting. Now you might think that, okay, that opposition person is just going to like spew propaganda and um, you know take apart everything that the speaker or writer has to say, and it actually, I don't think would work that way, because you're in a unfriendly audience and it's your job to
You want to be
appeal to
persuasive.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You don't want to drive them away. You have a
you don't want to drive
motivation
them away.
to
Yeah,
win them
right,
over. Yeah.
right.
That
So I don't know, is that a good explanation?
yeah. Um I think people would have a lot of questions about how the specifics of like
Absolutely.
how like
So
who
buy the
yeah.
book and
But
you'll
yeah,
find out.
okay. But that idea, I mean, it kind of gets to the heart of how I view these things, because to me it's like this divergence of narratives, right? Like these narratives are growing
Oh
apart.
yeah.
So it's like anything you can do to get people to start considering the better aspects of the other narrative will draw the narratives a little bit closer together, right?
Yes. Yes.
And that's how I think about a lot of the stuff I write about. It's like
Oh yeah.
if you engage with the better arguments on the other side, it draws the narratives together. Um, yeah. So and yeah, to your, I was going to bring up too a good example of the whole bubble phenomenon recently was when the Supreme Court was, everybody knew the Supreme Court was going to weigh in on the Colorado ruling to remove Trump from the ballot. And
Right.
that was a good example where in the liberal leaning, sphere, I saw these people act as if it was, a certainty that that was a good ruling Colorado made, and like the only reason the Supreme Court would vote against it would be like conservative bias or pro-Trump bias, and like versus like I read Tankle News, which I just interviewed Isaac Saul, who started Tankle News recently, and I had a much better idea that like, oh, from reading that and reading the arguments, I was almost certain that the Supreme Court was going to rule against it, and why, and what the good reasons were, right? But the thing I
Yeah.
saw in the liberal leaning sphere, including people I knew, it was like they spoke as if you had that opinion that that was going to happen, or if you thought that was a good, those were good arguments, that you were pro Trump or you had conservative bias. And I think that was just a good example where everyone was kind of shocked, like, what do you mean that was a unanimous Supreme Court ruling? I was expecting it to be split amongst the usual, and I thought that was just a good example where if your example for your your solution for that would be, on CNN, there would have been somebody, explaining the better arguments, and even why like liberals, Democrats should want that, because if it went the other way, it could be used against a Democrat president, and these kind of better arguments, which I just don't think many people are exposed to for many of these issues on either side.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. No, yeah, we've talked about this before. We're both, we both believe that most political thinking is in the form of narratives, and a term I use a lot in my book for it is talking points, which are the sort of manifestations in public discourse that sort of create and activate and reinforce narratives,
granular
for
pieces of the narrative. Yeah, they're like pieces.
yes,
Yeah, yeah,
right.
yeah. Gotcha.
Um, I don't know if this is the ideal place to stick this in, but since you brought up the liberal bubble, I just wanted to plug your book. I think it's so great that the approach you're taking of just focusing on one side, for this book anyway.
Oh, the latest one. Yeah,
Yeah, your new one, right.
yeah, yeah. Liberal
Which
to a liberal anti-Trump audience. Yeah, yeah.
right.
Mhm.
Because uh, there's so many liberals and progressive who thinks, oh, it's just that side's problem, and they don't see um, the way they're contributing to polarization themselves, and the way that liberal sanctimony just really pisses people on the right off to such a deep degree.
Mhm.
Um,
The righteousness.
so and righteousness, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Not that there's not some of
yeah,
that going the other way too, but
of course.
it's not totally symmetric in my opinion.
Well, I do. Yeah, I do often think about I mean, there's all sorts of asymmetries, which I think is an unexamined part of examining American polarization, or any conflict, is these group asymmetries. It's like
Yeah,
the fact that liberal leaning people dominate the mainstream media and the Hollywood and academic world. It's like that is an asymmetry that has effects on how the conflict plays out, and I don't think those kind of asymmetries are talked about enough. But
right,
yeah.
right.
um do you want to is there anything we haven't gotten to that that's important that we that you want to touch on?
Um, well,
Oh, about your I was going to ask you about your book title. You know, the word moderates can be kind of like off-putting to some people because some people are like, I have, you know, views that some people would consider extreme, like I don't want to be a moderate, you know. So, there's different, you know, different approaches of explaining or defining what a moderate is. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how you view that word.
sure, sure. Well, yeah, the definition that I use is yeah, no, there's a lot of different interpretations, and some of the interpretations of what a moderate is aren't too complimentary. You know, they're people who are wishy-washy, indecisive, low information, and you know, and that's true for some people for sure. But um, so the definition I used in my book, and it's not a standard definition, but it's people who despise both the hard right and the hard left.
Mhm.
You know, who don't who are resistant to sort of one-sided, grand, sweeping narratives that come from either side. And so, um,
And when you say despise, you don't have to hate them as people, just really like dislike their ideas and approach, right? Yeah.
yeah, well, yes, except for I have a special place in hell in my book for propagandists who intentionally manipulate the system. You know, I most of what's going on in the system is just economic forces, you know, and like I don't blame journalists or you know, social media companies or anyone generally. The one bad actors or one category of bad actors though is propagandists. So but you
Yeah.
know,
You
to
got
your large
your 9 levels of polarization hell. You put them in.
exactly. But to your larger point, no, I never
Yeah, yeah. I was
try
just
to
clarifying.
despise, yeah, the people who are in a lot of cases pawns of a lot of this. But yeah,
Although I will say, like, the thing that strikes me is like some of these people who I think are some of the most, in my mind, honestly, kind of gross and despicable people. I'm not gonna name any names right now. I talk about them elsewhere, but
okay,
some of these people are to me like it's really hard to separate their, you know, their propaganda from like the true belief, because some of these people just, to me, are like their minds have been deranged by conflict, right? They're kind of like they really do think that they're in an us versus them battle, and like I guess that gets into where, you know, they're willing to the ends justify the means kind of approaches, where they're like, yeah, we're willing to, you know, bend the truth or even lie because the ends are so justified. And
yeah, no,
not to excuse it, but it kind of like some of these people I think have been deranged by conflict, which I think is kind of like the bad thing about conflict and extreme polarization, is it deranges more and more people to be that way, right?
sure, definitely, yeah,
Yeah.
no, and yeah, no, and if I thought you know the planet was going to be destroyed if I didn't win, I might be willing to lie too, you know. So your point is well taken, but I will name one name just as kind of a counterexample. Um,
And I'm willing to name some names, you know, I just didn't want to derail it, but
oh well, I'll just name one, and although I I won't go so far as to say that I know what his true beliefs are, um, but Christopher Rufo.
mm,
Do you remember that ignominious tweet that he did, I don't know, about 3 years ago
yeah.
about how he was programming um, the world to understand the words critical race theory in a specific way. Um,
Yeah, he was basically like lifting up the curtain and saying,
Lifting up the curtain.
here's my approach to ruining this word and making it toxic and like kind of in a manipulative, deceptive way, right?
Yeah. No, he didn't even, there was no hint of apology or, or any sort of or any kind of justification. It painted a picture of, that he regards conservatives as rubes, that they're, that, the general public on the conservative side is so manipulable, and, that, you know, I can program their thinking and they won't be any of the wiser. I just find that so reprehensible.
It's a strange thing too, because like there's plenty of, disagree or not, there's plenty of ways to, you know, denigrate those CRT ideas or whatever ideas on the left. Like
Sure.
there's plenty of like he did you don't have to do that to demean someone else's ideas, right? There's plenty of legitimate ways that you can disagree. So yeah, that it's but yeah, to your point, it's like and in his book, I'm pretty sure I mentioned his book. Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure I mentioned his book about like the Marxist ideology on the left in my recent book as an example of like I might have taken it out because it's more for a liberal audience now. But um, an example of how both sides in conflict will reach for these really elaborate, extra pessimistic narratives that go back in history and help build up this narrative of the immense badness and scariness of the other side. Like he'll, so tying it to, and there is some truth through it, right? Like far left ideas do appear, in these dangerous scenarios, and there's been all sorts of bad things and the horrors of communism and stuff in some of these countries. But it's like to build this narrative, which is what the left does about the how everything on the right is linking back to this racism and this elaborate narrative, right?
Sure.
Not to say it's the same. We all have our views about who's doing it more than the others and who's doing it worse, but there's just this tendency to build these elaborate narratives, which is what I see Rufo and these other people doing, is like, and whether he believes it or not, to your point, it's like he could be doing it purposefully as a means to, just destroy the brand. Not that it, really needs it, because there's plenty of other people doing it too. But he could be doing it, yeah, painting that picture purposefully, or he could really believe like that's the scariness that he sees on the left, and it can be hard to say. But to your point, yeah, his tweet about kind of saying, "Here's my strategy for painting these things really negatively," kind of shows you where his
Yeah.
mind's at. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I could say more about it because, yeah, I do have a section of my book that kind of drills in, kind of like you did in your first book, drills into specific topics and sort of explores the talking points on each side and how quickly they fall apart if you just look at them, briefly. But I talk a bit about Rufo and critical race theory, and he has this briefing book that he puts together, uh, and for use by, I don't know, in schools or parents or what have you, and you just look at it and it's like straw man, straw man, straw
Mhm.
man, straw man, one after the other.
Right.
It's so transparent, and this thing about, I think we're going afield a little bit, but you know, that Marxism or that critical race theory is Marxist. Who cares? Why should I care about that? But Marxism is a scare word, and
Right.
it just yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well,
There's all sorts of. It's quite easy. That's the thing. Getting back to the narrative idea, it's like
yeah,
the importance of stories. Like it's so easy to build. I think that's a really key fundamental aspect of understanding polarization too. It's just so easy to build stories, right? It's like we can build stories out of nothing basically. So it's like you give us a few, like a two or three data points, we can build this story around it, right? Like tying all this stuff together, or the story about the threat you're facing or how bad your enemies are, right? It's like
yeah, yeah.
it's just so easy
Oh,
for
it's
us,
easy to do. Yeah. No,
it
I
is.
mentioned in my book, Daniel Kahneman talks about what he calls the illusion of knowledge. The principle is that, we just latch onto these stories, and the world isn't really as explainable as it seems to be. And in fact, the less you know, the more certain you can feel about that your story is a reflection of reality.
Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to throw in there was I've been reading this philosopher Kevin Dorst's work. He's got a Substack and he talks about basically like rational polarization, how we can, have these both sides on any issue can have these rational narratives, and they were reached rationally and be completely divergent. And it's all about how you sample information in a complex system, because you can't absorb all the information. You just pick and choose. That's not to say everybody's, clearly there's a lot of irrationality, but he's talking about, for a lot of these issues that we argue over, there's various rational narratives you could put together, but then you add on top the toxic polarization, which makes us veer towards the irrational for how we, for some of these things. But I think
Right.
he's talking about a pretty important key part of it, where it's like the fundamental ways that we can rationally diverge on a lot of these complex issues.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's one thing deep in my soul, I look around and I think, where's the intellectual humility? I'd love to teach people about how little they know, and how much they shouldn't rely on what they think they know. But that's a tough one. I got a lot of that out of studying cognitive science and the way that people make inferences, and the sort of the values that are hidden underneath a lot of it, and so on and so forth. There's been a lot of great researchers and scholars who've written about it. But
We need like a PBS show or some kind of public service show every day, reminding people that they're idiots. It's like
yeah,
that'd be
you are
pretty.
so dumb.
Yeah, it's
Could be
like
the
I'm an
name of it.
idiot. We're all idiots, and let's just walk through how badly we get stuff wrong. That would actually be pretty good show.
Yeah, I'd watch it.
Somebody's probably done something like that.
Probably.
Do you want to talk anything about anything that you feel that we really missed that is important about your work that you want to throw in?
Well, there was just, thank you for asking. I just kind of to pull in stuff we were talking at the very beginning. So, this Bust Open the Silos national initiative that I described earlier, that's one of 7 that I have in the book. Kind of the theme is finding ways to help people learn about politics and about political argumentation, but not through like anything formal, just in daily life, through ways that don't require any effort or willpower or study. That's kind of a theme through several of my proposals. But like I said, um, some of them would definitely require legislative action, which is pretty tough. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about, so I don't think we can go straight to any of these proposals. And the route that I have in mind, and it's partly why I named the book the way I did. I don't know, the
Moderates of the world unite.
Yes.
Mention that again.
There could be, thank you. There could be pros and cons to that title, but a serious part of it is that I think for any of this to happen, it's going to require a critical mass of engaged moderates to stand up and start demanding change of Congress. And so, where my focus is going to be next is to work on ways to create educational materials that even include describing these proposals to people, so that they can start to get a vision, not only that, oh, there's ways we could improve it, but also to get a better sense that, gosh, how did we get into this? This is not how the fourth estate is supposed to work in theory, even, and so um, my hope is that through creating educational materials like for college level and even for public spaces, I can play some small role in starting to help develop that critical mass of engaged moderates.
Mm.
That will lead to greater amounts of advocacy and kind of as a complement to the grassroots depolarization efforts that you and others are working on. So,
And eventually you can create a moderate militia of moderate to start to kick
go
off the
ahead, make fun of me.
the moderate revolution. No, you said it. You said your book title was supposed to be a little funny, right? Like the idea,
It is, yeah. It's like
moderates revolting. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. Well, workers of the world unite,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
I just wanted to clarify. I wasn't mocking it. So,
All
um,
right, all right.
but did you also want to mention, because I really liked your idea about the responses to specifically polarizing tweets or other posts. Did you want to mention that idea really
Oh,
briefly
sure.
in case anyone
Oh,
watching it might, theoretically someone watching it might, want to contact you about the idea or something?
oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's one issue I've started prototyping, and it's one of the 7 proposals in the book is I'm calling it right now, at least, the School Marm. The vision is to have a large nonpartisan organization that the focus, just to back up a little, is on polarizing rhetoric on social media, of which there's a lot, of course,
A little bit.
and not so much about like factual falsehoods and of course nothing, not like the sort of illegal stuff which the platforms themselves are responsible for taking care of and taking down. Um, but the platforms have no incentive to sort of do anything about polarized rhetoric on their platforms, and certainly no business interest in doing so. So, but an external organization could go in and selectively go in and find polarizing posts, and when it does, uh, attaching a little bit of educational material right next to those posts. And of course, it's not going to get everyone, but if you get enough of them that people start seeing this once in a while, even it'll raise consciousness, and people will, when they see polarizing rhetoric, they'll sort of slow down a little bit, and maybe some of them will, some users will try to temper what they say online a little better, and it'll just kind of reduce the status of like dunking
Yeah,
so
I like that.
that's the School Marm.
Yeah, I like that. I do think, yeah, getting back to the idea that there is a real demand out there for reducing these kind of like team-based ways of thinking and high contempt ways of engaging. I do think you'd see people respond to that. I mean, that was one of the, I kind of took a similar small scale approach with my Twitter. That was basically what I was doing, was just responding and doing a little bit of that. But I do think there's a hunger there for it. And I think a lot of times people just don't even know like what that path looks like. So they're like looking for like, oh, that's how this works. Like that's how we do it. Like, because I think a lot of people want that, but they just don't even know, how do we get better? What does better discourse look like, or what do we have to push against exactly? Because it's
Right, right.
yeah. So I think that would be I'm a fan of that. Yeah, the more people, even just people listening who want to do that on their own, I think that's a like creating, encouraging people to be like, hey, go examine why this person's speech is unreasonable and polarizing, and and
Yeah,
not in an insulting way, but a persuasive way to say like, hey,
right.
can you see how this leads to, the
Yeah,
toxicity and such? Yeah.
right, right. Well, and just to pile on that, uh, Christopher Bale at Duke, who's studied this a lot, has measured, that the more extreme people on social media are the ones that that post by far the most and get promoted the most, and moderates just they don't even speak up.
Hmm.
It's too intimidating. They're going to get and so people don't even see moderates. Well, not none, but
Right.
there's not that much in the political realm. There's not that much moderate speech
Yeah.
right now. And if there were ways to encourage them to feel comfortable to speak
Hmm.
and just bring the temperature down on social media,
Right. Right. That's the thing.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it really does work. I mean, I've seen just in my personal life on Facebook with a few friends, it's like somebody shares something kind of unreasonable and everyone's like, yeah. And then you make a point about, poking a hole in the logic gently. And everyone's like, oh, yeah, you're right. That's, it's a good point.
Yeah.
Tone down
I
the,
don't
yeah. So
know.
it's like, it doesn't actually take that much. But to your point, it's like so few people feel like getting into those, kind of like caustic interactions, and they, it's just not, it takes effort, it takes time, it takes a headache. You risk offending people, et cetera, et cetera. So there's all these little
Yeah.
reasons, but
Yeah. Right.
yeah.
Right.
Okay, yeah, this has been great, David. I appreciate it, and yeah, best of luck getting the book out there.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me on your show.
Sure, thanks. That was a talk with David Foster. You can learn more about him at his site, knowthesystem.org. I'll include links to some of the things we talked about, including his book, at the entry for this episode on my site, peoplewhoreadpeople.com. And you can learn more about my soon-to-be released new book on polarization at american-anger.com. Thanks for listening. Music by Small Skies.